Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Art Forum. Wherever you are, welcome. My name's David Sequeira. I'm the director of the Margaret Lawrence Gallery at the Victorian College of the Arts, which is part of the University of Melbourne, and I'm also the person who coordinates Art Forum. And I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are located on right now. For most of us in South Central Victoria, this is Kulin Nation. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the work of artists through song, dance, painting, ritual, that this work took place here for many generations before us, and that these practices were intimately linked with all sorts of processes of healing, land management, sustenance, welfare, law, and language. Our guest speaker today is Elizabeth Macgregor. Elizabeth Macgregor began her career as a curator-driver of the Scottish Arts Council's Travelling Gallery, which ignited her commitment to engaging new audiences with the work of living artists. In 1989, she was appointed the director of Ikon Gallery, Birmingham, and in 1999, she took up directorship of Sydney's Museum of Contemporary Art, a time when it was facing significant challenges. Last year, the museum attracted over 1 million visitors. Liz Ann's innovation and contribution to the arts has been recognised with the Veuve Clicquot Businesswoman Award in 2008, the Australia Business Arts Foundation Award, it's the Business Leadership Award, and an OBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours. In 2019, she was included in ArtReview's International Power 100 list, and she won the Arts and Culture category of the Australian Financial Review's 100 Women of Influence Awards. She sits on the foundation of the Sydney Swans and the Board of UNICEF Australia. Wherever you are, please make Liz Ann welcome.
The curator of the Scottish Arts Council's Travelling Gallery, I knew absolutely nothing about contemporary art. I studied art history by accident, actually, having begun a degree in languages, and I took art as a separate subject. My imagination was fired by the glories of the art of the past, from the Byzantine era to the Baroque. And I was really an extraordinary advocate for the history of art. However, my enthusiasm somewhat faltered around 1900. I was a bit of a typical art historian, somewhat disdainful of modern and contemporary art. So when I found myself in a job that required curating contemporary art, I was on a very steep learning curve. I was incredibly lucky though. My first epiphany was when I met a group of artists shortly after I started working in Edinburgh. Artists whose work I could not look up in the library. Artists whose work was not already endorsed by critics. Artists whose work I had to think about and make up my own mind about, having, of course, the extraordinary advantage of being able to talk to them. A whole new world opened up for me, a world of the imagination, where experience of the visual arts could present new ways to think and talk about the world, and which could help us define our place within it. My job was taking exhibitions on board this bus. Sorry for the fuzzy picture, it is quite old. And when I set off on the Travelling Gallery, I had my second epiphany, which was that people from all walks of life can be open to the ideas of contemporary art. Remember, this was the days when the British tabloids made regular sport of contemporary art, greeting the annual Turner Prize at the Tate with howls of derision. This rubbish could not possibly be appreciated by anyone, especially the so-called man in the street. My experience on the bus was quite the opposite. I remember very well one occasion when I took the bus to a school with an exhibition of the then young British sculptors, Anish Kapoor, Anthony Gormley, Shirzi Hushiari, Tony Cragg. It was a very tough inner city location. The last class of the day was to be a group of 15-year-old boys, the kids that were going to leave school without any qualifications, the no-hopers, who were given time in the art class to fill in, the dropouts as they were known. My heart sank. I was expecting a tough end to my day. To my astonishment, these boys were fascinated by the work we were showing. They asked searching questions, and they totally lacked the cynicism towards contemporary art that I had expected. They had an ability to talk quite complex ideas through looking at the work from the consumerism of Tony Cragg to the visual ambiguities of Anish Kapoor. I found out later that the art teacher, Graham Murray, who'd kept well out of sight during my visit, was in fact the owner of a wonderful private gallery of minimal and conceptual art in Edinburgh, which represented the likes of Ian Hamilton Finlay. He kept his teaching in a tough inner city school very quiet, but he was clearly having a phenomenal influence. This encounter, among many I had on the bus, has always remained with me. For these boys, art had clearly opened up a new world. What kind of impact did this have on their lives? We don't know where they ended up, but I like to think that their ability to articulate ideas as a result of their encounters with the art world would stand them in better stead for life in general. I am, of course, an optimist. One of the great pleasures of my job is to walk through the galleries and to see visitors' responses as they come into contact with works of art. It is the opening up of the imaginative space that I believe is one of the most important and at the same time probably the most unquantifiable of the benefits of encounters between audience and art. What has fascinated me throughout my career is how we can actually assess this impact and therefore demonstrate the value of art to society. Some artists, of course, set out with a very definite agenda. I worked in Birmingham with the wonderful African-American artist Adrian Piper, whose agenda is very much to confront people with their own xenophobia. I thought perhaps naively that this was a show where we would be able to assess the impact on visitors because she asks very direct questions. A few weeks after the opening, I was at a dinner with some of the gallery's supporters, and I was dismayed to hear them dismiss the exhibition as something that was really only relevant in America. This in a city with a very, very high population of African, Caribbean and Asian people who were subjected to everyday casual racism. Only the previous week, an African Caribbean curator friend had been prevented from buying a train ticket and subjected to police questioning because the ticket seller did not believe that a black man should have a credit card. I reflected to a colleague on how depressed I was by this dinner party response to Adrian's potent work. But he pointed out that whatever these people said at the time, we again had no idea how they responded and how they might react differently in a potentially racist situation as a result of this work of art. He was right. We simply cannot know what impact an encounter with art might have. Reactions are very difficult and individual and almost impossible to measure. What is important is that the Contemporary Art Museum, and here we have images from the current Biennale, provides spaces for ideas put forward by artists to be discussed and debated in many ways, in ways that can't happen anywhere else, not in the classroom, not in the home, not in the media, and not online. I believe that it is art's capacity for triggering all kinds of conversations and responses that makes it so critical today. As the artist Douglas Gordon once said, art is what makes conversation possible. It is this social dimension of art that makes what is happening to us now so hard, and why I believe so many of the superb online programs we are seeing will fail to satisfy. We need to physically experience art. We need to experience it with others for it to weave its magic. And as we consider the ramifications of the current crisis, there is another dimension to art that is equally important. And I think this is one area where we can demonstrate impact. In the mid-1980s, when I was working in London, I met an Irish artist called Morris O'Connell. Morris was one of a growing group of artists whose work was more concerned with process than product. And as a result, I don't have an image. He brought his process to bear on social situations. And when I met him, he was in residence at the Barbican Art Centre. He was asked to make a presentation to the board, chaired by the eminent broadcaster John Tusa. He got up with a whiteboard and mapped the relationships of people to each other within the organisation, based on how everyone operated. This was information he had gleaned from various encounters with staff, formal and informal, during his residency. This flow chart was highly illuminating and exposed some of the many communication and operational issues of the organisation. The chairman thanked Morris and remarked that he could have paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to management consultants and not got any of this invaluable information. Artists ask the questions that simply don't occur to people like management consultants because they bring a different kind of thinking to a situation. It's art, art as process, art as the mapping of a series of unseen relationships, art which tells a story about the operations of an organisation, art which doesn't set out with an agenda, but certainly finished up with an outcome which was of great benefit. This kind of work, now often called socially engaged practice, has of course developed significantly since the 1980s. Here in Australia, the MCA, in partnership with colleagues in Western Sydney, has developed a programme called C3 West, bringing artists into situations that call for that very different kind of thinking to solve problems and address issues in a community context. The first partnership we developed was highly unlikely, with the Panthers Entertainment Group, a rugby league club, an ideal partner because of its community engagement. The club's visionary marketing manager saw the potential of working with artists and the MCA from the outset, and his support resulted in a number of commissions. The most far-reaching of these was the art collective from the outskirts of Paris, Campement Urbain, founded in the late 1990s by internationally renowned video artist Sylvie Blochet and urban planner and architect François Douane. The work of Campement Urbain has had considerable international success and has been included in the Venice Biennale. With the goal of acting from within, their practice combines and examines and explores notions of responsibility and sharing. Their aim is to use artistic endeavours to bring new ways of thinking to solve the problems of communities in the peripheries of today's large cities. Most of their work comes out of close consultation with the local population. Like Morris O'Connell, Sylvie Blochet asks different questions. She visited Sydney for a preliminary exploration of the site in Penrith at the invitation of the Panthers in late 2006, and she made a proposition to the club called the Panthers of the Future and the Futures of Panthers. She did this in the form of an extraordinary video lecture, and a major part of the project was based on interviews with local residents. This artistic response to the dreams and aspirations of the people of Penrith was a resounding success, and she was commissioned by the council to apply her thinking to the planned redevelopment of a major site in the city. What better way to demonstrate the potential that exists for artists to influence real change than by listening to the views of artists in one of the greatest challenges that faces Sydney, creating the circumstances for growth of vibrant and flourishing communities away from the glamour of the harbourside city. Similarly, in 2009, Ash Keating undertook a project in response to the problem of waste and the difficulties, seems ironic now looking back, of getting people to understand what needed to be recycled. In a highly imaginative series of interventions, he created processions through the city of Penrith and created almost a furore about the amount of waste that he was placing on the grounds in front of the council chambers. In other words, we used art to raise the issue, to get people to think about it, and the outcome was a huge response from the public. The centrepiece was this large sculptural installation outside the council chambers, which of course led to the usual outrage about art being piles of rubbish, but in this case, for a very good outcome. In 2010, we were approached by Hurstville Council, interested in seeing if we could get an artist to help them to get some community information. Nobody was replying to their boring surveys. We employed Angelica Masiti, who created a series of videos and performances and installations around the issues that she heard about from the local community. She approached the everyday environment and discovered its unseen potential, finding out from local people what mattered to them. It resulted in a two-night event focusing around the main streets of the city. And again, the council went out and did their surveys, but this time with a very positive response. Over 5,000 people responded. Angelica created a series of wonderful new videos, demonstrable outcomes for everyone involved. An equally successful project took place in southwest Sydney with Michael Tuffery, who worked with local groups to retrieve burnt out cars from the river. This was intended to change that kind of behaviour. I think we were very idealistic about it, but I'm delighted to say that the sculpture that Michael created with the local community, which is now sited in the school at the request of the principal, has led to a significant diminution in the number of cars dumped in the river. That is a very specific outcome. And of course, as only artists can do, if you pop open the bonnet of that car, it's a barbecue. Now, not all artists are interested in this kind of socially engaged work. To go back to my first argument, many of them just want to put their ideas out there and see what kind of reaction it elicits. But many of them do have agendas, and Michael Tuffery talks openly about what art did for him in terms of changing his life. A few years ago, one of our Indigenous curators, Keith Munro, was up in Gumbalanya, and in a stroke of inspiration, he connected the school with Vernon Aki in his studio in Brisbane. It was an extraordinary moment, and by the end of the week, word had gone around the community about what interesting things were happening, and there was 100% attendance in the school. A few years later, Keith got a phone call from the principal to say that a group of those kids had been the first in that school to complete year 12. And he had no doubt that this short period of residency and collaboration with the MCA had led to this outcome. Now, everybody in the arts has these wonderful anecdotal stories about what impact art has on people's lives. Over the past few years, we've decided to put in place research with key programs in order to demonstrate the social outcomes. Whether it's a young person from the country who doesn't have easy access to galleries, a family for whom English is a second language, an older person and their carer living with dementia, or a child under 5. We've put together a program with our artist educators to devise a series of strategies to encourage creativity. Not everyone can be an artist, but we believe that everyone can be creative, and it is by unleashing this creativity that we can change lives. This creative process, as it was with Morris O'Connell and Sylvie Blocher, is as important as the finished artwork that is destined for the walls of the collector or the gallery. By working with university partners, we've been able to demonstrate the impact. The Art and Wonder programme for the under 5s, a collaboration with the Mia Mia Centre at the Macquarie University, and the Art and Dementia programme with the Brain and Mind Institute at the University of Sydney, which has resulted in an online toolkit for carers now supported by the government agency responsible for ageing. We've also embarked on a groundbreaking partnership with the newly opened Inner City High School. This is our team of fabulous artist educators who are embedded in the school, working alongside teachers to help them teach all subjects creatively. They are not teaching art, they are teaching with teachers all subjects, but how to do that in a more creative way in order to engage the students and prepare them for the future. This extraordinary project, we believe, will have a long-term impact. There is already a recognition that young people are going to need very different skills to meet the challenges of the future in the age of AI, which will perform many of the traditional jobs. Young people are going to need resilience, empathy, collaborative skills, agility. These are all things that the artist educators use contemporary art to teach. And despite the current crisis, the principal remains committed to the project, and the artist will be back in the school as soon as it reopens. In some ways, the crisis has given us the opportunity to promote more broadly this role of the artist in society. And it's not the first time we've responded to a crisis. After Black Saturday in Victoria, we were asked by the Department of Education to send a team of our artist educators to affected areas to provide inspiration through creative strategies to get young people to tell their stories and to help them imagine a brighter future. In February this year, we held a meeting with our colleagues from the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre to talk about what we could do now in relation to the recent bushfire crisis. We talked about the responsibility of the arts to provide support for people in times of difficulty. We all agreed on one thing: the power of art to change lives. Little did we know that in just over a month, one crisis would be superseded by another. Nor could we have imagined that both our institutions would be closed, and we would be asking ourselves, how can we stay connected with the physical buildings shut? In considering this question, we realized that we of course have an incredible resource, our team of artist educators, and the social impact programs they've already been leading. We wanted to see what we could do to see how to prove the need for artists in these critical times. We know from our social impact programs that artists can contribute to our well-being, teaching creative strategies which help people stay mentally strong and adapt to new realities. As we found in Victoria, working with artists can make a significant contribution to building and strengthening communities, even while we're isolated. Artists create connections between communities across time and place. Artists can inspire us in the darkest times. One of our artist educators, Liam Benson, who did our magnificent Bella Room, posted images of native flowers on his Instagram to remind us to look around us at the wonders of nature. Biennale artist Lucas Island focuses our attention on the impact of plastic, a timely reminder about the environment when so many other concerns have come to the fore. We think back to Janet Lawrence's magnificent exhibition here, also reminding us about the climate crisis and asking us to take the challenges of the survival of the planet more seriously. And then on an international note, just after the crisis began, a friend of mine, Susan Kleinberg, distributed her 2002 video of famous people talking about confronting the fear of the unknown, something we are all facing right now. Last night, I tuned in to an Instagram live discussion between Oliver Eliasson and Hans Ulrich Obrist from the Serpentine. So even in these dark days, through the internet, we can connect. Artists are used to working in isolation, so we can learn from their experiences. And in isolation, it's even more important to keep our minds agile. A collector once said to me, "Art is the gymnasium of the mind." And as the crisis has unfolded, we've seen unprecedented creative energy unleashed as people express themselves in short videos and memes. I'm sure you've all been on the receiving end of these. Clever, questioning, provocative, humorous, perplexing, annoying, funny. Just like contemporary art. I'm not suggesting these are great artworks. I just think it demonstrates that everyone can be creative and that we need all of this creativity right now. I also believe we will need art and artists even more as we come out of the crisis. We need an arts-led recovery to encourage people back into society to reconnect in the real world. I said earlier that I didn't believe that the online could possibly replace the real experience, that visceral experience of being in a space with other people enjoying and appreciating works of art. It simply cannot be replicated, even with the wonders of three-dimensional technology. When this period of isolation ends, people will be longing for the real, for the opportunity to come together, to return to our natural state as social beings. Artists will be there to help our communities flourish, we hope. A creative focus will give people confidence and will contribute to the recovery. We just have to hope that we can get through these dark times and get to that point. I was once asked to name one thing that I thought would change society. And I said, tongue-in-cheek, having an artist on the board of every company in this country. What a pipe dream. We can't even get women onto boards without people bleating on about merit. But let's stop for a moment and consider what we want society to look like. We need to be open to more perspectives, to different solutions, and to different criteria for how people get into these so-called positions of influence. Maybe if we put artists at the center and not the periphery, we would be better able to cope with these crises. The last 2 decades have seen an extraordinary rise in contemporary art in all its various forms. An extraordinary rise in the numbers of people going to museums. As David said in his introduction, the MCA had over 1 million visitors last year. That was unthinkable when I came in 1999. We need all kinds of artists. We need artists whose work inspires, delights, and challenges us. We need work that operates in the subconscious, so it's only years later that we realize what an impact it had, when we respond according to our circumstances. We need art that does not prescribe an outcome. We need art for art's sake, in that old-fashioned term. I'd like to suggest that we rename it Art for Society's Sake. We also need artists who are interested in bringing their creative thinking to bear on specific issues, and artists whose practice can help us address these pressing issues. Artists can encourage us all to be creative, open-minded in our outlook, tolerant in our attitude to difference. Artists can bring us to a new understanding of complex issues. I believe in times of crisis, we need artists more than ever. Thank you.
Lisanne, thank you so much for that talk. Just on behalf of the VCA and the staff of the Margaret Lawrence Gallery, on behalf of everybody that's participating in this talk, but really on behalf of artists and student artists in particular, just thank you for positioning art in such an exciting, central position, given what the world's dealing with right now. So please, I acknowledge you and thank you for everything that you've contributed, not just today, but really over the last 21 years.
Yes, it's been an interesting journey.
It sure has. We have some time for a few questions. If there's anybody out in Zoom land who has a question for Lisanne Macgregor, if you could send that question through to Nick via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And Nick, I believe you have a couple of questions already.
Yes, we've got a question from Julian Beaumont first, so I'll just pass over to Julian.
You're muted.
Julian, are you muted? Yeah, Julian, you need to unmute yourself. There we are.
Am I there now?
Yes.
There you are.
Hi, Julian.
Hi, Lisanne. How are you doing? Well, thank you for that. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Am I on visual as well? Do I need
No, not at the moment.
Do I need to get dressed or something?
Hair and makeup.
I asked, the question I asked basically was, I noted in your talk, Lisanne, that you referred to yourself as an optimist, and I have absolutely no reason ever to doubt that, given your wonderful work at the MCA, particularly at the beginning and when things weren't so easy. Can you tell us how your optimism envisages the near future in the context of a public which has been starved of live exhibition?
Well, I do think
returning to the unbeatable sort of experience of walking around a live show, for example, like that Cornelia Parker.
Yes, I do believe that there will be a huge upsurge in public response once we reopen, and I know already I'm getting incredible response to our online programs, but people are saying it's making them want to see the real thing. I think that's what's so interesting is we've worked so hard with the Biennale and Brooke and the team there to put on incredible online experiences about the Biennale, and it's making people hungry to come and see it for real.
Good.
So I do not believe, and I've never believed this. I gave a lecture in the context of a Remix conference about a year ago, arguing about the power of the real. and how people actually really, they need to be in a real, in the space. And I don't think that's ever going to go. And I think in a funny way, the crisis is actually making people realize that even more. And so I think there is an upside. I think the downside, of course, is how do we get to that point? How do we keep artists sustained? You know, we can talk about, I'm an optimist, but I'm not seeing much sign of the powers that be saying that arts are critical and we need to make, I mean, I heard yesterday that one of the priorities for tourism is giving money to aquaria and zoos because they have to keep the animals alive. I mean, what about the artists and the actors and the performers and the entertainers? I mean, you know, they need to live too. So I'm trying to be optimistic, but I think it is very hard at the moment, and maybe we need to just let this settle for a few weeks and then see as we come out of it, hopefully some further support. But I know everybody, I was talking with my colleagues yesterday in the state and national galleries, and everybody is working very hard to do what they can within very limited means of support. But we all know what it's looking like out there for artists right now.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Because I mean, I agree with you. I think that it's going to be extremely hard, and then obviously we need to support artists. Without art, we are back in the primordial ages.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pass over to Kate Dorr now, who has another question.
Oh, hi, Lizanne. Thank you so much. Hi, thank you so much. That was terrific. My question was around specific advice for young emerging artists, particularly people just as they're leaving art school, and perhaps this time aside, because it will pass. I'd love to hear a little bit. I loved hearing you talk about driving around Scotland and, you know, that beginning, and I just think that's so interesting, and how it, you know, sparked such an interest in art and where that's taken you. And yeah, I'd just love to hear a bit more on that, in that space.
So I think the thing that struck me when I met the group of artists that inspired me to get more, if you like, more engaged with the contemporary art was that, I mean, I've talked a lot about artists working in isolation, but actually I haven't said so much about artists working in collaboration with each other. And I think for young artists, you know, that was a group of young artists that got together, found themselves a gallery space, started showing their work, you know, the kinds of things that artists try to do all the time. And we're all very conscious of how much harder everything seems to be now. But I think there are also incredible opportunities for artists now, like the power of Instagram, that you can actually connect with people in a different way. And so I think it's, you know, that things have got harder. Real estate's more expensive. It's hard to get a physical space. But at the same time, artists nowadays are able to seize the agenda in a way and put their work out there. How they then get an audience is a whole other issue, but at least there are different channels, I think, for artists to get their work up. I don't know, I was reflecting the other day as to whether it's any harder now. I think the circumstance, this particular crisis obviously is like something we've never seen. I mean, if someone says unprecedented again, I'm going to throw up, but it is unprecedented. But I think if we look back, things have changed. And I do think, if I think back over my career, the way that contemporary art was treated when I began is very different now. I mean, now it's in the lifestyle magazines, you know, we see interviews with artists as a matter of course. I think contemporary art has infiltrated society, sometimes in a good way and sometimes maybe not. But I do think there's a lot more interest, a lot more focus. There are a lot more collectors. There's a lot more private support. The kind of levels of support that we get now were unthinkable 20 years ago. It was impossible for the museum to be entirely privately funded, and in fact still is. I think the big thing we need to be really worrying about here is the significant decrease in public funding. And I think that really is what the crisis is showing up, is the lack of support, the whittling away of money, and so on. And I think that's a very big concern. Do you want me to talk more about the bus?
Okay, we have a question from Bettina Purdy, which was about the lack of funding. So would you like me to pass her on to her now?
Hi. God, where'd I put it? My comment and question was that I couldn't help but feel some of what you were discussing was an idealised view of the role of artists when so many arts organisations have closed and so very many artists have lost work. It's difficult for artists at the moment to be the creative energy that you're talking about to help society when they're worried about the practicalities of putting a roof over their heads or feeding their families. And while I agree that we need artists during times of crisis, how do we as an industry start solving the problem of societal and government lack of support for the arts?
I think you have to start with where I started, Bettina. If we can't, people like me and others like me cannot demonstrate the role and the value of art in society, we might as well pack up and go home, because nobody's going to give us money to sit around and make art. It's just the reality. It's the one thing I've learned in all my career. It doesn't matter how much I value art. If I can't convince, and we all can't convince as a society, those that make the decisions about the money, that artists matter, then they're not going to give us the money. So that's why my position is we have to demonstrate the role of art in society. I totally agree with you. It is not something that a lot of artists are going to be able to do right now. But although having said that, the team of artist educators we have here, and I should say, I totally appreciate, we made a policy decision to maintain the employment of the artist educators. We did it. And it's hard, and we had, you know, the financials are, we've lost 30% of our income here. So it's pretty tough, but we have to try and do that. And I do that because I think if we let those artists go, I will not be able to make the argument that they're critical to society. And I think all the things I was talking about the being able to demonstrate the value, if we can't do that, we're never going to get money for artists. They just think we're irrelevant. So I think the crisis actually highlights perhaps our failure to make those arguments in as strong a way as we should be doing. So I think that the kind of voice we need to get up there to, whether it's politicians or corporates or philanthropists or whatever, those people are the people who will make the fundamental decisions about whether artists survive or not. It's just how society works. So artists themselves putting up their hands and saying they're suffering, yeah, of course, it's not going to get anywhere. You actually have to have cogent campaigns that demonstrate why when I came, people said to me, oh, the government should just give the Museum of Contemporary Art money. And I said, why? Why should the government give the Museum of Contemporary Art money? And so what we had to do was articulate why we mattered. Why did the Museum of Contemporary Art matter to society? And we did that. We did that through C3 West. We did that through building audiences. We did that through education programs. And that was the only reason after 18 months we got money from the state government. If I just sat here and said, oh, well, we're good, we're a great organization, we employ artists, we would have gone under. And there were a lot of people at the time who thought that the government owed us. Government doesn't owe any of us anything. Government owes money to taxpayers, and it owes it has to be responsible to the way in which they spend that money. So we have to demonstrate the value. That's basically my thesis. And I would love to see it happen in this crisis. I'd love to see in the next few weeks the federal and the state governments come out, as some states have, let's be honest, I think Victoria may have done, and say, yes, we think the arts matter and they are going to play a role in the stimulus, and here's the money to do it. That would be success for me, and I'm still an optimist.
Great. I think that addresses the next question as well. So maybe we could talk more about the bus, if you like.
I think that's where it came from, really, was because I think that if you would like me to say what artists can do in this, I think this is what you have to do. You have to persuade everybody around you that what you're doing is as important as the nurses and the frontline workers and everybody else. So what I found on the bus was that by taking artists with me and introducing them to the audience who thought artists were pretty weird, they were they read all this stuff in the newspapers, it was all negative. We've seen it here. George Brandis, when he attacked the arts, actually quoted things like, I'm fed up with seeing, art money going to people who walk around with poles on their heads. That kind of negative stereotyping of what artists do. We've all got to play a role in challenging that. And if that means artists going out and, you know, and lots of my friends are artists, and they, you know, my friend Callum is a very successful artist. He talks about how he talks to his plumber about what he does, you know, and the plumber, I mean, Callum is an abstract artist. You might think, well, the plumber's not going to get that kind of thing. It's complicated, you know, and we all have these stereotypes. My belief from the bus was that anybody and everybody can come to an understanding of contemporary art if they're treated with respect, if they're given information, if they're encouraged to look, if they're given the tools to think about it. One of the things that used to drive me mad when I was beginning as a curator was this: the art speaks for itself. Well, you know what? I was an intelligent, educated person, and an awful lot of art wasn't speaking to me. And it's one of the things I've really driven through my career, is actually not just putting art on, but actually telling the public what the curators know, which is what some of the ideas that were behind it, what the art, and it is not about dumbing down or making it easy or anything. It is about encouraging interaction. And it was something when I came here, I was a little shocked at Australia's lack of doing this, I have to say. And the reason why I think that happened so fundamentally in the UK was because in the 1980s, there was such an attack on the arts from the government, from the Thatcher government. Everybody had to justify their existence. You know, there was no, you couldn't just do art and put it on the walls. You just couldn't expect to get public money if you did it. You had to make the arguments. And so galleries in the UK became very adept at encouraging broader audiences, looking at who their audience was, making sure it wasn't just the usual suspects, engaging with students, getting education programs running, not just sitting back and saying, this is great art and you should just appreciate it. So I think that missing link in Australia, I think we're playing catch up here. I mean, I still go into galleries and I'm going, what am I looking at? You know, there's nothing, there's no information, there's nothing. So there's a big job to be done to educate us, our sector, in terms of how we need to make those arguments. So that's kind of what I learned on the bus, was that the audience don't automatically appreciate what we're doing unless we take the trouble to reach out to them, to make them feel comfortable, to give them opportunities to engage, to give them basic information. And it was a really interesting learning curve, having done a curatorial course in a very old-fashioned way, and then being confronted with people, and then realizing that as soon as I started to speak to them about the work, as artists do, they would go, oh yeah, that's really interesting. Oh wow, yeah, I'd love to know more about that. Basic customer service, actually. Making sure your front of house team are friendly and open and answer questions and don't make you feel like an idiot. All these things I think that galleries for years actually ignored and did not encourage anyone to actually feel comfortable going into a contemporary gallery.
Nick, we have time for one more question.
Okay, I'm going to pass on to Sophie Campbell.
Hi, Sophie.
Oh, hello. Thank you for a great talk. I just have one quick question. Has there been an online exhibition that you've seen in the last few weeks that's particularly captured your attention? I know that there's so many out.
This is so funny. So a journalist asked me that last week, and do you know what I said? I'd rather slit my wrists right now. I'm watching reruns of Inspector Morse when I'm not working. It's not quite true. I mean, I have been delving in a little bit, but I find it very difficult, the whole online thing. I'm the wrong age, and that's why I was really taken last night when I clicked on to Oliver Ellison with Hans Ulrich on Instagram, because it was easy. I didn't have to look for it, and it was really engaging. It was Oliver just talking about what books he was reading. It was Hans Ulrich just questioning him a little bit about his thinking in the crisis, and it was short, 20 minutes, and I really enjoyed it. So I think we need more of this kind of immediacy. I know people out there are really desperate to hear from curators, from artists and so on. And, you know, there's a huge appetite for it. But in terms of going to an online exhibition, I looked through those lists that come out, you know, of the 10 best experiences, you know, go around the V&A or whatever. I'm going to wait until they're open again, frankly. But do check out mca.art. Here's my plug. We've done some incredible work there. And as I say, and I'm not the right person to ask because I'm so immersed in it all the time. As I say, when I get to the end of the day, I want to do something completely different. And but mca.art will give you access to Biennale and our collection information. And we'd love your feedback. Please tell us what we're getting right, what we're getting wrong. And I think a lot of these things that are happening now will probably continue afterwards. We're very aware that some of the groups we're trying to reach now are not going to be able to come to the museum if we open with social distancing, for example. And I'm also very concerned about the fact that 30% of the kids in some of the schools we work with do not have online access. So I'm thinking now, how do we make sure this crisis doesn't exacerbate the haves and the have-nots in relation to art? I think, you know, as my career history has always been about engaging everyone. And the mantra that our team has here is art is for everyone. And I don't want to see large tranches of people being left behind in this crisis. People are already talking about it in relation to school teaching as well. So it's a bit of an issue. Sorry, that was a bit off tangent, but I hope it was useful.
Lizanne, I can't thank you enough. I mean, I remember when you first moved to Australia and, you know, what an incredible time that was in the late 90s. And I just look at your contribution to the world of Australian contemporary art, to cultural development, to curatorship. And it's just incredibly inspiring. And I just thank you on behalf of everybody, not just for the talk, but for that sustained contribution. Wherever you are, please acknowledge our guest speaker today. And yeah, on behalf of everyone, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And to our audience, we will see you.
Promoting art, that's all I can say to you. Do all you can.
Great. Thanks so much. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.